Seconds after lifting off from San Cristóbal, Venezuela, this twin-engine turboprop suddenly rolled hard to the left and slammed back into the ground. The explosion that followed left 2 people dead and a community in shock. No one yet knows exactly why it happened, but the footage, the conditions, and the type of aircraft involved already give us a few technical clues worth talking about. This isn't about guessing or blaming anyone. It's about understanding how something can go catastrophically wrong in the most unforgiving phase of flight takeoff. So let's break down what's confirmed, what's being looked into, and what early technical factors might have come into play. Here's what we know for sure. On the 22nd of October 2025, a Piper PA-31T1 Cheyenne I, tail number YV1443, took off from Paramillo Airport in San Cristóbal, Venezuela. Seconds after takeoff, the airplane climbed briefly, banked sharply to the left, and impacted the ground near the runway. The wreckage burst into flames almost immediately. Venezuela's INAC quickly confirmed the accident that morning and activated the National Investigation Board, JIAC, to handle the case. 2 people were killed, others were injured, and the wreck was completely destroyed by fire. Video clips taken from around the airport, which have now spread widely online, show the aircraft rolling almost inverted before impact. They've become the primary visual record of what happened, and investigators will likely analyze them frame by frame. Now, this wasn't a passenger airline flight. The Cheyenne is a small twin-engine turboprop, used mostly for private, charter, and business operations. It's a fast, capable airplane, but is also a demanding one, especially on takeoff, where power management, speed, and precision all matter tremendously. That's the baseline: a high-performance twin, short runway, high-altitude field, and a loss of control seconds after liftoff. With that in mind, let's look closer at the airplane itself and why this specific type of aircraft requires such careful handling in that early phase of flight. The Piper PA-31T1 Cheyenne I is no simple piston twin. It's a pressurized turboprop, meaning each engine is a small jet engine driving a propeller. In this case, 2 Pratt & Whitney PT-6A engines, each producing roughly 500 horsepower, give the airplane its speed and climb capability. For its size, that's a lot of power, but it also means the Cheyenne reacts quickly to any power imbalance between the 2 sides. Every twin-engine airplane has what's called a VMC, or minimum control speed. That's the slowest airspeed at which the pilot can still keep the airplane under control if one engine suddenly loses power. Below that speed, the airplane's rudder simply doesn't have enough authority to counteract the yawing and rolling moment from the live engine, and the result can be an uncontrollable roll toward the dead one. Now imagine that scenario happening right after takeoff, barely 100 feet above the ground. There's no time, no altitude, and no space to recover. Even a perfectly trained pilot can find themselves in an impossible situation. And to be clear, we're not saying that's what happened here. But the motion seen in the video, that sharp, almost instantaneous roll, is consistent with the kind of aerodynamic loss of control that occurs when asymmetric thrust or drag suddenly develops near or below that critical speed. This is why twin-engine takeoffs are so carefully balanced. Both engines must accelerate evenly, power must be matched, and rotation must happen only after the aircraft reaches a safe speed well above that VMC threshold. Any mechanical issue, tire failure, or power difference that upsets that balance at the wrong moment can turn a routine climb into a fight for control. And at an airport like San Cristóbal's, those margins are even tighter, which we'll unpack next. Now, let's talk about where this flight took off, because the environment here matters just as much as the airplane itself. Paramillo Airport in San Cristóbal sits at an elevation of about 3,300 feet above sea level. For a small turboprop like the Cheyenne, that's already a performance challenge, especially on a warm day. The single runway there is roughly 3,300 feet long, which isn't much room when you're dealing with a heavy twin-engine aircraft that needs a solid amount of speed before liftoff. Here's the key concept: density, altitude. is not just how high the airport is, but how thin the air behaves because of heat, humidity, and elevation. When the air is thinner, propellers bite into it less effectively, the wings generate less lift, and engines don't produce as much power. So a takeoff that feels normal at sea level can suddenly feel sluggish or underpowered at high altitude airports, and your climb rate can drop dramatically. Combine that with rising terrain around San Cristóbal, and pilots have very little room for error. They have to manage weight carefully, set proper power, and ensure everything's balanced perfectly. In conditions like that, even a small variation, a few extra degrees of temperature, a slight imbalance in thrust, or a tire not tracking straight can shift the situation from normal to barely holding on. Now, none of this is specific to YV1443, it's simply how the physics of flight behave in high elevation, short runway environments. But understanding that context helps explain why investigators will be looking so closely at every detail of the takeoff run and the aircraft's initial climb performance. At this early stage, a few possible scenarios have been discussed, both by witnesses on the ground and by pilots analyzing the footage. Again, these are not conclusions, just early observations that help frame what the investigators might be evaluating. Some eyewitnesses mentioned hearing what sounded like a tire burst or a mechanical noise just as the aircraft rotated. Others said they saw the plane roll sharply right after leaving the ground almost immediately. Local media echoed those accounts, suggesting a potential landing gear or tire-related issue that might have affected control. Meanwhile, experienced pilots and analysts watching the video noted that the aircraft's motion, a fast roll, and nose drop just after liftoff can also occur if there's asymmetric thrust. That's when one engine is producing significantly less power than the other. In a twin like the Cheyenne, that imbalance creates a powerful yawing and rolling force. If the airplane is still below that critical VMC speed we talked about earlier, it might not be possible to hold it straight even with full rudder and aileron. Another factor the investigators will consider is pilot response dynamics. When something happens just after takeoff, the pilot has maybe a second or two to react. In that brief window, muscle memory and instinct matter, but the airplane's aerodynamic limits may already be reached. Rudder authority fades fast when the aircraft is slow, and once the roll starts, recovery might be physically impossible at that altitude. A video clip can't tell us the full story. It can't show whether an engine lost power, whether a tire failed, or whether the airplane was at proper speed. That's why investigators rely on hard evidence, the mechanical and structural clues left behind. They'll examine propeller blades for signs of power, engine turbines for rotational damage, and wheel rims and tires for rupture patterns. Maintenance logs and weight and balance data will also play a huge role in confirming what the airplane's condition really was before that takeoff. So far, nothing points definitively one way or another. These are simply the mechanical and aerodynamic paths that the JIAC investigation will follow to find the truth slowly, methodically, and backed by data. So, what happens next? Once the fire is out and the site is secured, the investigation begins piece by piece. Venezuela's JIAC, along with support from INAC, will document every fragment of the wreckage, the impact path, the debris spread, and any ground scars. Each component tells a part of the story. The propellers and engines will be among the first key items examined. Investigators look for what's called power-on signatures, bent or twisted propeller blades that indicate whether the engines were producing power at impact. A sudden failure on one side will leave distinct clues on turbine, blades, and gearbox components. They'll also check tire and wheel fragments, especially since some witnesses mentioned a possible explosion or gear issue. A clean separation or burn mark can tell whether a tire failed before impact or as a result of the crash. Maintenance records and weight and balance sheets from that day will be reviewed to confirm whether the airplane was loaded within safe limits. On top of that, they'll analyze weather data, temperature, and pressure to calculate the exact density altitude during takeoff, because that number directly affects how much climb performance the aircraft could have had. All this evidence will feed into a preliminary report, usually within a few months. But the final report, with verified mechanical findings and human factors analysis, could take a year or more. That's normal. Aviation investigations are slow because they're careful, and that's what brings real answers. And it's worth remembering, behind every one of these reports are families, colleagues, and investigators who all share one goal: to make sure accidents like this are understood and hopefully prevented in the future. As of now, we only have fragments, a short video, witness accounts, and a tragic loss. The official report will eventually fill in the blanks. But even now, there's something to learn about just how critical those first few seconds after takeoff really are, where airspeed, power balance, and control margins decide everything. If you want to follow this case as it develops, subscribe or check back when the preliminary findings are released. We'll break them down here with the same respect and focus on facts.